Program provides a biblical perspective on news, including insightful interviews with elected leaders, newsmakers, and cultural experts. I want to thank you for joining us today. We have a great program coming up, but first, here are some headlines from our friends with FISM News.
For FISM News, I'm Samuel Case with your Washington Watch News update. Today is Monday, December 18th, and here are today's headlines. Well, the House has gone home for Christmas break, but the Senate is staying behind, hoping to scrounge together a deal on foreign aid and border security. Republicans are asking for revised border policies in exchange for President Biden's $100 billion aid package for Ukraine and Israel. Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma, who is leading those negotiations, says the GOP is looking for way more than just additional funding.
We said we understand there's a crisis at the border that need additional funds, but we need a change in policy, not just a change in dollars. They're asking for dollars to be able to facilitate people through. We're asking to say we've got to actually stop people on this. And you can't say we have a national security crisis in Ukraine and we don't have a national security crisis in the United States.
The Senate has until Sunday night to reach a deal, but many Republicans are doubtful one can be made. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham says the White House has waited too long to negotiate.
Well, I think this will go into next year. I've been talking to the people at the table. The White House got engaged 5 days ago. They sent over a supplemental with border security provisions that did nothing to change policy. The bottom line here is we feel like we're being jammed. We're not anywhere close to a deal.
But even if they can come to an agreement, it still remains unlikely the House will reconvene for a vote. Meanwhile, let's get an update on the war in Gaza. FISM's Ian Patrick has all the latest.
Well, it seems that Israel has expressed interest in another possible ceasefire. According to recent reports, Israeli officials are continuing to meet with the Prime Minister of Qatar to discuss a potential new deal in order to stop fighting and secure the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed that hostage deal discussions were taking place among Qatar, Egypt, and Israel. Now, the director of Israel's Mossad spy agency met with Qatar's Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani over the weekend to begin the discussion. It appears that the deal will now include CIA Chief Bill Burns this week, as well as the deal reportedly makes progression. However, the news follows an unfortunate tragedy which befell the nation over the weekend. The Israeli Defense Forces confirmed that it had accidentally killed 3 of the captured hostages who had recently escaped captivity.
Thanks for that update, Ian. Meanwhile, as recruitment continues to dwindle, things are not looking good for the U.S. military going into next year. The Defense Department now tells Congress the U.S. will have the smallest fighting force since before World War II going into 2024, dropping to about 1.28 million. This comes as the Army, Navy, and Air Force all missed their recruitment goals this year by a combined total of 41,000. One Pentagon official says recruitment is now facing one of its greatest challenges since the draft ended back in the 1970s. Many Republicans say the military's recent emphasis on LGBT and racial issues is harming recruitment. But earlier this month, recruiting officials dismissed those concerns, saying the real issue is a cultural shift away from military service. And finally, on the abortion front, Ohio Supreme Court blocked the state's 6-week abortion ban on Friday, officially upholding a lower court ruling that's kept the ban on hold for the past 14 months in the state. The High Court dismissed a challenge brought by the state AG. The court cited in its ruling, a change in the law referencing a vote to enshrine abortion rights into the state constitution back in November. And with that, those are today's headlines from FISM News. Once again, I'm Samuel Case, and as always, you can watch our full show tonight, 5 p.m. Eastern Time on FISMnews.tv. Again, that's FISMnews.tv. You can also find it on social media as well, and by downloading the FISM app so you can take our news wherever you go. With all that, stay tuned for Washington Watch with Tony Perkins. Once again, I'm Samuel Case, and I'll see you again tomorrow with more news coverage.
From the heart of our nation's capital, here's Family Research Council President Tony Perkins.
Well, good afternoon, and welcome to this Monday edition of Washington Watch. I'm Jody Heiss, the Senior Vice President here at the Family Research Council. Honored to be sitting in this evening for Tony, and thank you for making Washington Watch part of your day. Before we get started today, there's something I want to just get started and honor a great man of God and a wonderful, powerful individual with the Family Research Council, Dean Nelson, a part of the Family Research Council and a frequent guest of this program, went home to be with the Lord this weekend after a battle with cancer. He actually served here at FRC as a senior fellow for African American Affairs. He was also the chairman of the Frederick Douglass Foundation. He was a leader, a champion for pro-life causes, the pro-life movement, all throughout his entire ministry. Dean was one of those individuals who was a natural at connecting people. He was generous in his relationships. He walked the walk. He was a man of God in every way. Dean leaves behind his wife Julia and 3 young children, and we here at FRC, among thousands and thousands across the country, will miss him dearly. We ask you to pray for his family and for everyone around him who right now is mourning deeply because of an enormous loss in Dean Nelson. And we thank you for that time. All right, coming up on today's program, we've got a lot to cover. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin made his second trip to Israel following the October 7th terror attacks.
Now, the United States has been clear and consistent since Hamas started this war on October 7th. Democracies are stronger and more secure when we uphold the law of war. And as I've said, protecting Palestinian civilians in Gaza is both a moral duty and a strategic imperative.
Of course, that was Secretary Austin earlier today during a joint news conference with Israel's defense minister. And though the secretary said U.S. support for Israel remains strong, did his comments actually signal a shift in the Biden administration's relationship with Israeli leaders? Carolyn Glick, host of the Carolyn Glick Show on the Jewish News Syndicate, will join me in a few moments to discuss that. And speaking of U.S.-Israeli relations, as America has certainly fallen so far away from God's call, our country has remained, up to this point, steadfast as a friend and an ally of Israel. And frankly, this is standing more and more in contrast with much of the world. But what would it mean if America's commitment to Israel were to falter? Well, I'll have that conversation with Heather Johnston, founder and president of JH Israel, a little bit later. And as an election year approaches, many state legislatures continue to look into the need to ensure fair elections. Texas State Senator Brian Hughes will join me to discuss a Texas law that was passed in 2021 to protect election integrity in his state. And then later on, the Vatican announced today that Roman Catholic priests may administer blessings to same-sex couples. But does this announcement match what the legacy media claims it does about Catholic theology? Reverend Gerald Murray from New York City's Holy Family Church will join me to unpack that a little bit later in the program. Of course, our website, TonyPerkins.com, in case you miss any part of today's show, or if you want to check archives of the past. And there's a lot of wonderful resources there for you as well, so be sure to check it out. And then as we start the new year, I want to encourage you to join us here at FRC with our daily Bible reading plan. The Stand on the Word journal can be yours to help you go through that daily Bible reading plan. And with your generous tax-deductible year-end gift, we'll send you a free copy of this journal. You don't want to miss it. We want you to join us as we go through the Word of God together. So call us at 1-800-225-4008. If you'd like a free copy, let us know. God bless you. We look forward to reading the Word with you next year. All right, let's jump into today's program. As I mentioned a moment ago, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin returned to Israel today, calling it a strategic imperative that Israeli forces protect civilians as part of their war against Hamas. Well, reports indicate that the Secretary's visit continues the Biden administration's push for Israeli leaders to scale back from the current phase of their war against Hamas. But just yesterday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to fight to the end in Gaza. So is the Biden administration's latest message today at odds with the goal of the Prime Minister? Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Carolyn Glick. She's a senior contributing editor at the Jewish News Syndicate and host of the Carolyn Glick Show on the Jewish News Syndicate. Carolyn, welcome back to Washington Watch. Great to have you.
Great to be on your program. Thanks for having me.
Well, listen, let's start with your reaction to Secretary Austin's visit and the remarks he made today.
His remarks were very similar to the remarks made by National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who was here at the end of last week. We've really sort of had this constant flow of senior administration officials to Israel every several days, every week or so, really almost since October 7th. And so Secretary Austin came. He said he stated American support for Israel's goal of defeating Hamas, of eradicating Hamas in Gaza. But then, as you mentioned in your introduction, he was placing limitations and hectoring Israel to do it in a certain way. And this goes together with an American policy that is requiring Israel, as a condition for continued American support for the operation, that we allow hundreds and hundreds of trucks of supplies into Gaza, which they refer to as humanitarian resupply or humanitarian aid. But really what it does, because Hamas is in control of large swaths of Gaza, including the border with Egypt, this is aid that goes directly to Hamas first, and then to Hamas apparatchiks second, and then is largely sold in the black markets by hawkers who crank the price up by 500% or so for the civilians that the United States claims that it's geared towards helping. So what the United States is doing with this is guaranteeing the longevity of Hamas's war machine, or at least prolonging that lifetime by continuing to supply it with food and water and fuel. So that undermines Israel's operational freedom and our flexibility, and also prolongs the life of the enemy. So the United States says something and does something that's the exact opposite of what it says, and it couches it all under this need to maintain allegiance to international law, which Israel does, like the Americans do in their wars, as a matter of course. So the hectoring is also a form of slander, because by saying you have to abide by international law, you're insinuating that Israel is doing something other than that.
Well, that's right, and that's what the problem is we support Israel, but. And that's what creates a lot of problems in all of this on both sides. Those of us here in the United States who support Israel, but also certainly Israel itself. So what we have here, it appears, Carolyn, is the Biden administration trying to thread a needle. And is this attempt to thread the needle really, is it too thin of a needle to try to thread? I mean, they're saying they support Israel, but they criticize the methods for conducting war against a terrorist opponent.
Well, it's the United States basically has, it has several leverage points over Israel. As its ally, Israel has trusted the United States. It ended a lot of its own production lines of shells and ammunition, trusting that in time of need, the United States would abide by its commitment to Israel and provide us with the ammunition that we need in order to fight. And that's being held up now, and the Senate just refused to pass again because they want a different bill. They want everything to be together: aid for Israel, aid for Ukraine. And the Republicans tried to separate them. And so the Democrats on the Senate side today blocked the aid bill to Israel from going through at least until the beginning of next year, after the Christmas holidays. So that's being held up. The Americans have the issue of the UN Security Council, where you have constant harping to force Israel into a ceasefire through a UN Security Council resolution. The Americans vetoed one last week, but this week there's another one that's going to be voted on, and you can assume that it'll always be on. So Israel is constantly on edge. Is the United States going to veto a Security Council resolution or abstain and enable it to go through? So that's another point of leverage that the United States holds over Israel. And so you see a lot of decision making by the government that is absolutely counter to what they said that Israel would and wouldn't do. And it's all in keeping with American demands on Israel. So the United States is using the leverage that it has over Israel because Israel views it as a trusted ally in order to, in many cases, particularly with everything having to do with supplying Gaza or supplying Hamas, first and foremost in Gaza, with water and food and fuel, the United States is undermining Israel's war effort.
Well, and Israel right now is resolute. Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying we will destroy Hamas, and frankly, they have to. I mean, they live in an extremely difficult neighborhood where everyone around them wants to annihilate Israel, and it seems as though the United States, in waffling just a little bit by saying, yeah, you can protect yourself, but I mean, the reality, these are terrorists. These are people who hate Israel. They hate the United States as well, for that matter. How many of them are across our own border? But the Prime Minister is absolutely right in his resolve. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I mean, the Israeli people view destroying Hamas as an imperative for our survival. There's literally no argument here that this is a war for Israel's survival. Prime Minister Netanyahu has referred to it as Israel's second war of independence. We simply cannot continue to coexist with a genocidal terrorist organization that just committed an act, a day of Holocaust inside of sovereign Israeli territory, and is still holding over 130 Israeli hostages in Gaza. So, we cannot coexist with Hamas. But Hamas, of course, isn't alone. It's one of many Iranian proxies that's operating against Israel in the region. And that's another issue, which is that the United States is saying they want to do everything to avoid a regional war, except a regional war is being fought throughout the region by Iran's proxies, not only against Israel, but against U.S. forces in Iraq, in Syria, shipping in the Red Sea. And in Lebanon, we have Hezbollah, which is Iran's foreign legion in Lebanon, which controls that country, that poses an existential threat to Israel, and is constantly escalating its attacks against Israel along the border. So this is a war that it's very, very difficult to fight, and that not only does Israel have to fight it, but it has to win it, and it has to win it in a way where nobody will have any question about who wins this war, just as nobody thinks, wait, did Germany win World War II or the Allies? Everybody knows it was the Allies, and it doesn't matter where they are in Timbuktu or where have you. I mean, everywhere in the world, everybody always knows that. Same too here. Everybody has to come away with this war recognizing that Israel won, because otherwise Israel's survival will be called into question.
Carolyn Glick, thank you so much for joining us on Washington Watch and keeping us up to speed on this. Our prayers are with Israel. Thank you for keeping us up to speed. All right, friends, after the break, I'll be going further with this discussion, speaking with Heather Johnston, who has organized congressional intel briefings on Israel. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment.
Everything we do begins as an idea. Before there can be acts of courage, there must be the belief that some things are worth sacrificing for. Before there can be marriage, there is the idea that man should not be alone. Before there was freedom, there was the idea that individuals are created equal. It's true that all ideas have consequences, but we're less aware that all consequences are the fruit of ideas. Before there was murder, there was hate. Before there was a Holocaust, there was the belief by some people that other people are undesirable. Our beliefs determine our behavior, and our beliefs about life's biggest questions determine our worldview. Where did I come from? Who decides what is right and wrong? What happens when I die? Our answers to these questions explain why people see the world so differently. Debates about abortion are really disagreements about where life gets its value. Debates over sexuality and gender and marriage are really disagreements about whether the rules are made by us or for us. What we think of as political debates are often much more than that. They're disagreements about the purpose of our lives and the source of truth. As Christians, our goal must be to think biblically about everything. Our goal is to help you see beyond red and blue, left and right, to see the battle of ideas at the root of it all. Our goal is to equip Christians with a biblical worldview and help them advance and defend the faith in their families, communities, and the public square. Cultural renewal doesn't begin with campaigns and elections. It begins with individuals turning from lies to truth. But that won't happen if people can't recognize a lie and don't believe truth exists. We want to help you see the spiritual war behind the political war, the truth claims behind the press release, and the forest from the trees.
Thank you for joining us this afternoon on Washington Watch. I'm your host, Jody Heiss, sitting in for Tony, and thank you for being a part of the program. As I discussed last segment, in public remarks made today in Israel, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin repeated the Biden administration's ongoing call for Israeli forces to transition to a lower intensity operation in the coming weeks. But Secretary Austin, at the same time, did affirm that America's support for Israel's security is unshakable. So you've got this back and forth type terminology and rhetoric coming. But the position that we have as an ally of Israel is increasingly putting the United States in an opposing position to worldwide sentiment. Obviously, seems like the support for Israel globally is beginning to wane. So what does the Bible say about all this? We know that the Bible says that God will bless those who bless Israel. And as Christians, we support Israel because we're grafted in to the promise that God made to Abraham. But what would it mean for our country if that support faltered? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Heather Johnston. She's the founder and president of J.H. Israel and U.S. Israel Education Association. Heather, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Great to be with you, Jody.
Well, it's great to have you with us again. And Heather, let's just start with the big picture. Let's just 30,000 foot perspective. What does the scripture say about standing with Israel?
Well, you were exactly right. I mean, there is an eternal covenant that God made with one man. His name was Abraham, and he set in motion what is the Jewish state for time immemorial, a covenant that was irrevocable, transcending space and time, eternal in its nature, going on forever. And so you have to ask yourself, how long is forever? Well, it just goes on into all of eternity. So God has an irrevocable covenant with Israel, whom he set in the middle of the nations as a centerpiece, where Israel would become a blessing for all nations. The spiritual blessings for all nations would come out of the state of Israel. Well, that is exactly what happened. You will be a blessing in the earth. I will cause those who bless you to be blessed, Israel, and those who curse you will be cursed. And it's interesting, Jody, that cursed word is used twice there, but the word is two different words in Hebrew. So if you read it again, it says those who, and it means to lightly esteem or take for granted. And then the other curse word is to bitterly turn against. So I will bless those who bless you, and I will bitterly turn against those who take you for granted. And that is really central to this. And it is a crux of the matter for all nations for all time. And the United States to this point has played that iconic role, that important role with the nations. But we see that we stand really at a place where that for a nation to prosper, they have to serve Israel. Their leaders have to have a relationship based on protection, based on economic growth and service to the nation of Israel. Isaiah 60, 9 and 10 is very clear. Foreigners will rebuild your walls, O Israel. Their kings are going to serve you. Though in anger I struck you, but with great compassion will I bring you back in great favor, and your gates will stand open so that the nations can bring you their wealth. Their kings will be guided in procession through the gates of Jerusalem. For the nation that will not serve you will perish and be destroyed. It's pretty strong. It's pretty black and white. It's pretty central, ultimate, and basic.
It really is, and there's some great insight and biblical principles and teaching there. There are a couple of things here, Heather, taking place. We have what you're just talking about, what we talk about here at FRC. You've got the spiritual, the biblical side, the Christian view of Israel, the biblical understanding of Israel. And then you have just the practical side. It's as though so many people have totally denied or forgotten or overlooked the brutality of Hamas itself. And so you've got the biblical issue, and you've got just the reality that these are terrorists, and the brutality that they have inflicted on people. You've hosted a lot of briefings for members of Congress and high-ranking Israeli military officials. What are they hearing? What is the message that they're getting in all of this?
I would say, Jody, the message that Congress is getting and from the officials of Israel is we just need undivided support. We have been upended, our philosophy, our understanding of the Palestinian-Hamas situation. It has caught them literally by surprise how horrific. In fact, the whole world, it's just as you said, it's hard to imbibe such horror. It's hard to imagine brutality and savagery at that level because in our generation, we haven't ever seen it like that. I think for the U.S. Congress and those that are listening to the officials, they are hearing the same thing. Israel has to prosecute this war to its completion, completely defeating Hamas, completely removing their military and political powers and their will to want to do something like this again. And then also, they're hearing we can't have aid conditioned on whether we're making, based on decisions we're making in the middle of war versus the opinion of Washington, D.C. on what the length of time should be, how it should be prosecuted, all of those things. They need undivided support, and that's what they're asking for.
We've got less than a minute left. Christians need to engage this thing. What can we as Christians do to show our support for Israel?
Well, I think, if you kind of think to yourself, you're looking at churches today and people are online, and I would say there's two different roles for Christians. One is pastors, and pastors need to, from their pulpit, be standing up, and they need to be leading their congregation in prayer. Our nation is at war in the Middle East. The United States is, and Israel, our greatest ally, is in the fight for their survival. It is not a time to stand down and be silent and stand there and not know what to do when you can actually stand in your pulpit and lead your entire congregation into intercession. Secondly, as a Christian standing in the United States today, we can pray for Israel. We need to be giving towards those causes that are taking care right now of those relief efforts, the rehabilitation for IDF soldiers. There's a lot out there to support. And so there's a way to be demonstrably involved going forward. Pray, give, and ultimately go. Make sure you show up. You can pretend
Heather,
to care.
we got to wrap it up right there.
Great.
Thank you so much, Heather Johnson, JH Israel. All right, friends, as election year approaches, more and more the issue of election integrity is on the table. What are some states doing to protect elections? We'll talk about it right after the break. Stay tuned.
All of us are born with the desire to find truth and meaning. Where did I come from? What happens when I die? While our answers to these questions may divide us, we are united in our need for the freedom to answer life's biggest questions and make life's biggest decisions for ourselves. That's why religious freedom matters for everyone. Religious freedom matters because the powerful have long wanted to control those who are less powerful. Religious freedom matters because the freedom of those who are different is often threatened by those who believe different is dangerous. Leah Sheribu, a Christian teenager in Nigeria, remains a captive of Boko Haram for her refusal to renounce her Christian faith. Chinese pastor Wang Yi is serving a 9-year sentence for speaking publicly against the Chinese government. In Pakistan, Asif Pervez is on death row for allegedly sending a blasphemous text message. All of this because people in power decided different is dangerous. At the Center for Religious Liberty at Family Research Council, we promote religious freedom for everyone because the only alternative is religious freedom for no one. We encourage Americans and the American government to engage and advocate for the persecuted, and they do. We work every day to bring good news to the afflicted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners. We do it because that's what Jesus does. We work to give freedom to others because we ourselves have been set free.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. I'm your host, Jody Heiss, sitting in today for Tony. Glad to have you with us. All right, as the 2024 presidential elections approaches, many voters continue to express deep concerns over election integrity and whether or not they can trust the election process as a whole. We all certainly know that cheating can be accomplished. And in fact, recent polls, some that we've talked about even recently on this program, have verified those suspicions. Last couple of years, several states, including my own state of Georgia and the state of Texas and many others, have passed laws to uphold the integrity of elections. Well, Texas is one of those states leading the way, and joining me to discuss this is State Senator Brian Hughes. He represents the 1st Senate District of Texas. Senator Hughes, welcome to Washington Watch. Great to have you.
Congressman, thank you for having me on. Glad to be with you.
Well, listen, hats off to you and the state of Texas and other states. My home state of Georgia has been heavily involved in trying to protect elections, and I would say probably those two states, Georgia and Texas, are probably leading the way. Many people are looking at these and saying these are model pieces of legislation. So you have Senate Bill 1 there in Texas. Tell us about this. Why is it so important for ensuring election integrity, and what does Senate Bill 1 do?
Congressman, thank you. You're so right. You said it well. You've seen the polling. People on the left and the right are not sure if they can trust the elections. And we have to have elections where people can know the results and accept the results and move forward if our system is going to work. So Senate Bill 1, given that number from our Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, who presides over the Texas Senate, this is a priority for him and really ought to be for everybody. Not really a partisan issue, but making sure those elections are working like they should. So our mantra is easy to vote, hard to cheat. Both of those are obviously important. Easy to vote and hard to cheat. We found that those mail ballots can be the greatest source, certainly the greatest potential for fraud. I know that was the case in Georgia and many states. And so we've cracked down on these ballot harvesters, these people who are paid by political campaigns, and they go to the homes of vulnerable voters, mislead them, get their signatures, sometimes forge their signatures, and being paid by a campaign under the guise of helping the voters. And in fact, they're trying to impose their will, trying to steal their vote. So we've cracked down on that, criminal and civil liability for vote harvesting. If you're being paid by a campaign, you need to stay away from the voter and their ballot. You can campaign, you can encourage them to vote, but when that mail ballot's present, you cannot be anywhere near that in Texas or you're committing a crime. And what about when those ballots come in? Now in Texas, we have 24-hour live stream of whenever those ballots are being counted, wherever they are. Also, before that process, when they're checking the signature verification. I know in Georgia that was an issue in 2020, and so many states where these signature verification processes, also in some places in Texas, were being shortcutted. We want to make sure that every vote counts, every legitimate vote cast by that voter. We also implemented voter ID for those mail ballots. Now, when you request your mail ballot, you give us your voter registration number or your driver license number or your social security number. And so that way, when the ballot comes in, we can verify that to make sure it was you, the voter, who requested that ballot, and make sure you, the voter, are the one who cast that ballot. Simple common sense reforms like that. We also, for in-person voting, expanded the hours, made it easier for folks to vote, give them more opportunities. And one more thing we found was happening on in-person voting on Election Day on the polling place. We had these vote harvesters being paid by campaigns, coming up alongside vulnerable voters, maybe first-time voters, maybe voters with limited English proficiency, or voters who weren't sure what was happening. They come alongside these voters and say, oh, let me help you. And they walk into the polling place with that voter, but then it's that a voter assistant who's doing the voting and not the voter. We're cracking down on that. If folks need help, they're going to get help, but we cannot have paid political operatives in the voting booth influencing voters. That's wrong, that's cheating, and we're not letting that happen in Texas.
Couldn't agree with you anymore. And these mail-in ballots, I'm sure you saw the poll this past week of 1 in 5 of those who voted by mail admitted to fraudulent activity. And you would feel confident if you were being polled. Did you cheat? Did you commit fraud? Probably some people say, oh, no, not me. So probably the number is more than that. We've only got a little over a minute left, Senator. But for our viewers and listeners right now in other states, how do you think they can kind of push their state lawmakers to enact some similar laws real quickly?
Senator, I would say this, those mail ballots, they're an important tool for folks who are disabled, who are going to be out of the county, going to be out of town. It's important. But as you know, states are pushing for universal mail ballots for everyone. That is a recipe for fraud. That's a recipe for elections that we cannot trust. So we want to make the in-person voting process as smooth and easy and secure as we can. And for those folks who need to vote by mail, that's important, make sure we have those checks in place. We're making sure it's the voter requesting the ballot, the voter casting the ballot, make sure we're matching up those signatures and keep those paid political operatives out of the process. Our elections are not for sale. We want to keep it that way.
We all want to keep it that way. State Senator Brian Hughes from Texas, thank you so much for joining us on Washington Watch, and thank you for leading the charge in Texas and hopefully rippling effect far beyond to keep elections secure. God bless you. Merry Christmas. All right, friends, coming up after... Thank you. Coming up after the break, a lot of news today about word coming out of the Vatican about maybe a change in position with same-sex marriage. Well, following the break here, Father Gerald Murray will be joining me to discuss the latest announcement from the Vatican and how it measures up in reality to what you're hearing in the legacy media. Very important discussion coming your way right after the break, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.
The world is hurting. Streets are filled with crime. Families are broken. Sin is celebrated, and God is mocked. Everywhere we look, the wages of our sin are on full display. As Christians, we know that surrender to God's will is the solution to our biggest problems, but not everyone agrees. Even in church, we hear people say the most important thing is to be tolerant, that we shouldn't impose our morality on other people, and that loving our neighbor means celebrating what they do. But you can't do that. It's not that you don't love your neighbor, you do, but you care about God's opinion more than your neighbor's opinion, and this makes you different. In fact, sometimes it makes you feel alone, like you're the only one. But there is good news. You are not alone, not even close. Research has found that there are 59 million American adults who are a lot like you. There are millions of people around the country who are born again, deeply committed to practicing their faith, and believe the Bible is the reliable Word of God. But that's not all. They're also engaged in our government. They're voters. They're more likely to be involved in their community, and they're making a difference in elections. The problem is that a lot of them feel alone too. We want to change that. FRC wants to connect these 59 million Americans to speak the truth together, no matter the cost. If you want to learn more about this group and what it means to be a spiritually active, governance-engaged conservative, or if you want to find out if you are one of these SageCons yourself, go to frc.org/SageCon and take the quiz to find out. The world is hurting, and we have the solution. We can't do it alone, but we can do it if we work together. That's what we're working toward every day. Join us. Go to frc.org/SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more. That's SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more.
I'm often asked by people, Tony, how do you stay encouraged? How do you deal with all of the stuff in Washington, D.C., the negative policies that are attacking our faith, our family, and our freedoms? Well, you want me to let you in on the secret? It's called the Word of God. And that is why the Family Research Council embarked on Stand on the Word, a 2-year journey through the Bible. It's a chronological Bible reading plan with just 10 to 15 minutes a day. In 2 years, you will have covered the entire Bible. And to go along with this, Monday through Friday, I do a morning devotional that goes along with the reading of the day. It's all designed to encourage you on this journey because the Word of God, as the psalmist said, in my affliction, here's my comfort. Your Word gives me life. That is our source of strength. To find out more, go to tonyperkins.com or frc.org/Bible. And I invite you to join me every morning for our Stand on the Word Bible devotion.
It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas.
Well, welcome back to Washington Watch. I'm Jody Heiss, your host, sitting in today for Tony. Glad to have you on board with us. All right, you've probably have heard some about it today, but the legacy media is heralding some comments coming out of the Vatican as concrete steps to make the Roman Catholic Church more welcoming to LGBTQ Catholics. Well, is that really what they said? It seems as though at least some are saying that the Vatican is saying that Roman Catholic priests may administer blessings to same-sex couples. There's a document from the Vatican's doctrinal office said that these blessings do not legitimize same-sex marriage, but rather demonstrate that God welcomes everyone. But does this mark a reversal of a 2021 Vatican ruling that God cannot bless sin? Or is somehow there a lack of clarity in all of this, and is that by design? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Reverend Gerald Murray, the pastor of the Holy Family Church in New York City. Reverend Murray, welcome to Washington Watch. Thank you for joining us.
No, great to be with you, Jody. Thank you for having me on.
Well, we are honored to have you. All right, so let me get your reaction to the Vatican's announcement today. We know what the media is saying. What does the document actually say?
Well, unfortunately, the media is getting this basically right. The Pope has issued or approved of the issuance of a document from his doctrinal office, which states that couples in same-sex unions, meaning 2 men or 2 women in a same-sex union, and then couples who are in invalid second marriage can receive a blessing from the church as long as it's not what's called a liturgical blessing, meaning that it's a formal ritual that the church has established. This is a problem because what the Pope is saying is that people who have publicly pledged to unite in a relationship in which they commit grave immoral sins, such as sodomy, that they are deserving to have that relationship blessed by a priest. And what the blessing means is asking God to favor that relationship, to strengthen favor and, the normal thing that we do when we want to bless, for instance, an engaged couple or a couple that's getting married, things of that sort. Now, they make some kind of distinction saying this isn't a marriage, and of course it's not, because you can't marry, 2 men can't marry each other. But what the church is now saying is that the fact that they are living in sin without repentance is not an obstacle for the church to have some form of blessing given to them in public. And the document may say that this doesn't legitimize the relationship, but I don't know how anybody can say that seriously. Because why do people come to a church to have a blessing? Because they want to get an assurance from the priest that God's okay with what they're doing, and the church has no problem with their relationship. Well, that's the message you give when two people come together and then seek a blessing. So I'm very disturbed by this. This really is a very bad document, and it's going to cause immense grief and sorrow in the Catholic Church, not only in the U.S., but throughout the world.
Okay, so let me drive a little bit deeper with you on this. It's being reported as this is a major shift in the church. But does it change Catholic theology, or is this playing with just a rhetorical? I mean, is this a change in the position of the church?
It's a change in the fact that the church has never authorized this kind of blessing ceremony for two homosexuals or people in an invalid second marriage. The church has never authorized a blessing by priests of that relationship, or those people in that relationship who come to seek precisely a blessing to reaffirm their, what they would call their love for each other in those relationships which offend God. Now, the teaching church cannot change, but the pastors of the church can act in a way that undermines that teaching. And that is simply what's going on here. If you, for instance, if I'm holding an adult religion class and we do a section on the sixth commandment, and I tell everybody in there, okay, you have to avoid sexual sin, including homosexual acts. And if you're engaged in those, you have to stop. Well, at the end of the class, if two men come up to me and say, well, Father, as a matter of fact, we're civilly married, and we have no intention of separating, and we engage in the behavior you call sinful, but we don't think it's sinful, and we're not going to change. And then the priest said, well, I regret that, but that's what the teaching of the church is. And then the next question is, well, Pope Francis said you should bless us. And I'll say, I know he said that, but you can't do that. It's wrong. We can't say that God is pleased with what you're doing. So this is the quandary and the dilemma that's being imposed on the church by this papal document, because quite frankly, no pope in history has ever suggested that this is the way the church should act. And I think precisely because it does undermine the Catholic moral teaching on sexuality, that it's such a dangerous innovation.
Okay, so this is, in your mind, not, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, I'm trying to understand this myself. This is not in and of itself a departure of the teachings of the church. That can't be done. But what this does is open the door for the teachings of the church to be undermined. Is that correct? Yes or no?
Well, when I say the teaching can't be changed, a pope could take the document that says homosexual acts are immoral and cannot be blessed, and then he can change it to simply drop the first part and say they can be blessed. It doesn't change the teaching. Now, what happens is if you institute a practice like blessing homosexual couples, it gives the impression the church has no problem with their behavior, and that leads to the next conclusion that people have, well, I guess I'm okay doing this. So it's really a problem of
okay,
what
so let me ask
are we
you,
giving to the people.
Right. So with that, the issue here that all of us must understand and highlight, underscore, exclamation point is biblical truth. What does the Bible say on the issue? That ultimately is the issue here. So two things. What does the Bible say on this question? And secondly, why would the Vatican release this document or this declaration?
Yes, well, it is absolutely based on the teaching of the Bible. In the Old Testament, in St. Paul, our Lord said that we shouldn't even look on a woman with impure thoughts, so let alone commit impure acts with anybody. And it's also based on the natural law, that the way God created man and woman it reveals the innate purpose of the sexual faculty, that it's for procreation, the expression of married love, and to bring forth new life. Now, what this document does, therefore, is put all that aside and say, we're going to go along with the agenda of the sexual revolution, because the sexual revolution of the 60s, which we continue to exist under in basically all of the Western modern world, it basically says sex is about pleasure and you do whatever you want. As long as you don't hurt people, everybody agrees to it, then you're fine. And the Catholic Church says absolutely not. God's law is good, pure, and holy, and it's binding on all mankind. You can't exempt yourself from the law of God simply because you want to do something against it. For the church to get into this discussion and say, well, we find an exception here for people who want to have their relationship blessed, big mistake. It creates the impression that we have no problem with homosexual activity. And this is part of the legitimization of the gay lifestyle that's going on in Western world. I know this is very offensive to people who take the Bible seriously. And I'm sorry to say that the Pope has issued a document which doesn't support biblical morality in this regard.
So last question here for you. This is an issue that goes far beyond Catholic. It's not just a Catholic issue.
Right.
How do we continue creating a biblical worldview in our churches?
That's a great question. If there's anything we need to do is have more Bible study and more reading of the scriptures in a prayerful and thoughtful way, and then taking the questions of the day and trying to find out what has God revealed to us in the Holy Scriptures about those questions. And we'll come to some very enlightening understandings that, a large part of the modern world is based on the idea that man is sovereign. He determines everything. He determines what's right and wrong, what he can and cannot do. He has a right to do whatever he chooses for himself. That rejects biblical understanding of creation and man's role in it. So our goal, certainly in the Catholic Church and in all Christian churches, has to be whatever God has revealed to us as the holy way of life, we have to live it and encourage others to do. And we can do nothing to lead people into sin. But I'm afraid the net effect of this document is going to be that Catholics who identify as gays and homosexuals and people in invalid second marriages, they're going to come forward and say, Pope has no problem with me. Why should I listen to priests and others who might disagree with the Pope? No. If this has never happened in the life of the church up to this point, there's a reason for that, because the truth was clear. This innovation has to be resisted because it's going to produce chaos in so many lives and hurt souls.
Thank you so much, Father Gerald Murray, for coming on Washington Watch and for giving this explanation and broadening our understanding. God bless you as you continue moving forward in this battle, and wishing you a very, very Merry Christmas. All right, I want to continue this discussion on the Vatican's announcements today. I'm joined now by Sam McCarthy, a news writer at the Washington Stand. Sam, welcome back to Washington Watch. Glad to have you.
Thanks very much for having me on, Jody. It's really good to be talking with you.
Well, likewise, Sam. Thank you. All right, you just heard Father Murray very disturbed with how this opens the door to undermine some major teaching of the church. You're a Catholic. You certainly don't want to see your faith undermined or misrepresented, be it from non-Catholics or those in the media. Tell us your reaction to the announcement today.
Well, I do think that it is shocking to a certain extent. As Father Murray noted, we've never quite reached a point like this in the life of the 2,000-year history of the Catholic Church. I do think that it is being misrepresented in media. And I do think, as Father Murray noted, I think that this is a prime opportunity for those who would work against the doctrine and the teachings of the Catholic Church to undermine them. Now, a lot of what the document specifically states does not contradict Catholic Church teaching, but it does open up the opportunity for, essentially poor priests and bishops. I don't mean impoverished, but priests and bishops who are pushing an agenda, a left-wing LGBT agenda. It does open up the opportunity for them to essentially abuse this very explicitly unregulated system that the Pope has just laid out, or not laid out, as the case may be. The actual definition of what these non-liturgical blessings should look like is left essentially up to the discretion of the priest. There are hints given that it should be a matter of pointing the individual towards God, towards goodness and justice and living in the gospel, as the document itself states. But we've already seen, especially in Germany, bishops and priests who have gone ahead and defied the Pope outright with blessing same-sex unions, not just a couple, the individuals, and praying for them and for their salvation, but blessing the unions themselves. If they're willing to defy the Pope outright in 2021, 2022, they're going to do it again in 2023. They're just going to continue undermining church doctrine. And unfortunately, now they have something to point to that they can claim as cover.
And therein lies the problem, the open door, as you describe, and Father Murray as well, that this, I tell you, once a door is open, it's very difficult to close. And this appears to me, and I'd like your reaction to this, to be really two open doors, if you want. One, what Father Murray and yourself described, an open door into the church, putting bishops in an extremely difficult position to try to deal with this whole thing, and that opens the door to undermine the teachings of the church. But it also opens the door for the media to just attack the church and divide it even further. Is that a proper assessment based on the news media and the reports that you've seen today?
I'd say so. They very often misrepresent specifically what Pope Francis says. They've misrepresented what most popes have said over the past 40, 50 years. Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI in particular, and now Pope Francis. They're trying to push an agenda. They're trying to promote their LGBT left-wing ideology. And they're trying to, we see this not just with the Catholic Church, we've seen this with, the evangelical denominations as well. We've seen this attack on trying to redefine what they are in the media, so that not only are those on the outside arrayed or opposed against them, but in the inside, there's now division, infighting, insecurity, and a wondering of what's actually true, what's actually going on, because we do rely on journalists and on media to tell us what's true, to report the truth, and so many of them don't, and it's used as a way to attack Christians.
We're almost out of time, Sam, but do you think Pope Francis will release additional statements to clarify any of this?
He explicitly states in this declaration from the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, which is the Vatican's doctrinal office, he explicitly states that no further statements will be given, no further clarifications, etc. He's not been one really to clarify his comments.
Wow.
Back in 2016, a number of cardinals even asked him to clarify comments he made in his Apostolic Exhortation Amoris Laetitia, and to this day, he's not responded to them. So it's very unlikely that he's going to. Yep.
Sam McCarthy, Washington Stand, thank you so much for joining us on Washington Watch. All right, friends, a lot of issues. We need hope. We need God. Reminds me of Romans 15, where it says, "Now may the God of hope fill you with joy and peace in believing, that you may abound in hope by the power of the Spirit." Have a great evening. We'll see you tomorrow here on Washington Watch.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you've heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit TonyPerkins.com. Also, to leave a comment about Washington Watch, call our watch line at 1-866-372-7234. That's 1-866-372-7234.